Well, grace and peace. This is Pastor Jay. I want to talk about a verse that I came across, and it's a verse that really struck me as it really struck me as relating to the pro-life, anti-abortion ministry. So, our church is involved in a ministry called Speak for the Unborn. This is a ministry that was founded by Emmanuel Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And the ministry, what it involves is it's meant to be kind of a holistic pro-life ministry. So first and foremost, they have volunteers that are on the front lines at the abortion mills. So particularly in Louisville's context, at a particular abortion clinic. And they go there, and these volunteers will, as mothers are walking towards the clinic, and you have a mother and usually somebody accompanying them, like a family member or a friend. And so these volunteers do what's called sidewalk counseling, and they approach these mothers, and they have different goals, such as obviously they plead with them to keep the baby. They give the gospel, and they offer resources. And kind of the ultimate goal, obviously, is to see them saved, but also a goal, even whether they are converted that day or not, to connect them to a local church, a biblically healthy local church that can come alongside them and help with resources, whether it be giving them a place to stay for a time, helping them find a job, and again, just offering resources to stir up the mother to not kill their child, and then also ultimately to see them converted and discipled. And so that's the ministry in a nutshell. And that ministry is kind of I don't know if it has grown. And now a lot of other churches are involved. They're called network churches. And there's churches across the country. And there's even at least one, maybe more than one, I don't know. But there's even some churches in Canada that are involved. So real encouraged by this ministry. It's a blessing to be a part of. Our churches, I guess a year ago or maybe more, got involved with it. And so one of the things that strikes us as we're involved in this is this verse. Well, I haven't even mentioned this verse yet. So what's the verse I'm talking about? Well, so in Psalm 17, one of the marks of an enemy of God is it says that they close their hearts to pity. They close their hearts to pity. So when we are there, you have someone I didn't mention when it comes to this ministry is this group of people. They're volunteers as well, but they're called escorts, and their whole purpose is to protect them from people like us or any other pro-life voices that are on the street. Because you have other pro-life voices there. Some of them are just basically open-air preachers of the gospel. Like you have a group called Ref Church or Reformation Church in Shelbyville. Shout out to them. They're preaching the gospel. And many times they're also having conversations with people seeking to offer them help. So praise the Lord for them. There's also some Roman Catholics. And sometimes there's some other preachers that aren't so helpful. But they're not as common. But anyway, so there's other pro-life voices out there seeking to get them to turn away from killing their child. And the escorts are there to basically keep us away and or at least to drown out our voices and ultimately to drown out the voices that would protect these children. They are certainly people who close their hearts to pity, right? God has designed us as his image bearers, and he's designed us to pity the weak. And so when you see a baby and your heart is stirred up to joy or maybe sadness if the baby's in some sort of trouble, or pity, that's the image of God demonstrating itself. And when you close your heart to that emotion, you're going against what you were made to be. And that's exactly what they're doing, because they have an agenda. Their agenda is the pro-abortion agenda, which is, abortion should be made available at any cost, no matter what. Abortion should be made available because for the sake of the so-called freedom of the woman to, advance her career or just do whatever she wants to do. And so, you have to think to yourself, okay, they're basically saying we want so-called freedom for these women at the cost of a human life. And we many of these people know that this is a real baby in the womb. Some still that use that argument that it's just tissue, but not all. Some really do believe that it is a baby in the womb and it's worth the sacrifice anyway. And so you see what they're having to do. They're having to close their hearts to pity. And that's really dangerous for your soul. If you do that, you sear your conscience, and that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, this verse certainly applies to those escorts, but also it applies to these mothers, and that's what's really sad. If anybody has been designed to pity a child, it is a mother with a baby in the womb. And time again, when we're trying to talk to these mothers, most of the time they're not getting angry at us. Sometimes that does happen, but most of the time they're just ignoring us. And this verse really struck me as that they are closing their hearts to pity. And again, it's tragic. It's evil. It's not tragic. I mean, tragedy. A train collision is a tragedy, but this is something evil. To close your hearts to pity the child in your womb is evil. And but here's the thing, and here's my plea today. That ought to stir us up to not only pity the child in the womb, that ought to stir us up to pity that woman, because she is enslaved to her futile ways. In 1 Peter 1, I think it's 18, it says that God ransomed us or redeemed us out of our futile ways inherited from our forefathers. And that's meant to, that word redeem or ransom, that's an intentional word, especially in 1 Peter. Because 1 Peter, is full of imagery from Exodus, or well, not just Exodus, just Old Testament imagery in general. And so when you see that word redeem, it's associated with God redeeming his people from slavery out of Egypt. And it says very clearly many times that God pitied them. They were enslaved to the Egyptians. Well, as you get to the New Testament, you see that we are actually in ultimately that being enslaved to Egypt is actually a picture of being enslaved to a greater enemy, and that is our sin. Being enslaved to our sinful ways, and of course being enslaved to Satan, being enslaved to death. But if you're a Christian, God has ransomed you or redeemed you at the price of the blood of Jesus Christ. He has redeemed you, bought you back, and rescued you out of those sinful ways. When we talk to these abortion-minded mothers, they are enslaved to their sinful ways. And they think this abortion is going to satisfy them. It's going to make them happy. It's going to give them some sort of reward. They think they're going to gain from this, and they are certainly not going to gain from this. And they are so enslaved to their self-centered desires that they are closing their hearts to pity their own children in the womb. And so we ought to pity these mothers. Obviously, we ought to pity the escorts, but certainly we ought to pity these mothers. And so my plea is that if you or your church is not involved in some sort of pro-life ministry, please get involved. We need people. We need people on the sidewalks engaging these mothers, giving them the gospel, because the gospel of Jesus Christ is the only thing that's going to set them free from their selfish ways. Now, I'm all about voting pro-life in whatever way possible. And my desire is to see abortion abolished. It ought to be abolished. I want to see it criminalized. It ought to be a crime. It's evil. It's murder. It ought to be criminalized for the mother. It ought to be criminalized for the one doing, the one actually, the so-called doctor doing it. It ought to be a crime. However, we want more than that, right? We want to see abortion-minded people, just like any other sinner, saved and transformed. And we want them to pity at the very least, pity their children and love their children. So I'm pleading, we recently observed in the Southern Baptist Convention, we observed what's called Sanctity of Life Sunday. And so this is on my mind. But I want to plead with you to somehow be involved in this, whether it's on the front lines or, we would love to have more churches involved with Speak for the Unborn, or even if it's just going and preaching in the open air and preaching the gospel, and offering the hope of Christ. That even happens with Speak for the Unborn sometimes. Sometimes we're shouting through the window, not, when I say shouting, I don't mean, being aggressive or anything like that, but, just proclaim, because people are in that waiting room. And so we're pleading with them to keep their babies and pleading with them to come to Jesus. So anyway, please get involved somehow, be praying, and pray that you would not close your heart to pity these mothers, and to pity people who are, obviously we want to pity these babies. That ought to stir us up. We want to pity these mothers as well, and those that are accompanying them, and the escorts, and anybody that's involved in this gross injustice. So yeah, I especially encourage you to get involved with Speak for the Unborn. It's a blessed ministry, and we want to see more people involved. And yeah, just be praying about that, and let us continue to speak for the unborn, because they are voiceless. They don't have a voice, literally, and we need to be vigilant, diligent, and continuing. And again, the ultimate goal is salvation for these people. We want abolition, obviously, but we even want something greater than that. We want the Great Commission to advance, and that won't happen by law. It comes through the preaching of the gospel. All right. Anyway, grace and peace to you. Have a blessed day.